In February of 2007, over New South Wales, Australia, Polish-German paraglider Eva Wisniewska was sucked into a massive thunderstorm during a routine training flight and carried to nearly 33,000 feet, where temperatures dropped to around negative 50 degrees Celsius and oxygen levels were extremely low. She lost consciousness for about 40 minutes as her paraglider was tossed around inside the storm, yet somehow remained airborne. When the storm weakened, she descended and regained consciousness mid-air, surviving with only frostbite and minor bruising. Another pilot caught in the storm, Hee Zong-pin, was found dead nearly 50 miles away. In 2007 in California, a 23-year-old man crashed into a police vehicle and, fearing arrest, swallowed an absurd amount of methamphetamine he'd been carrying. He fled on foot, was chased across rooftops, and was eventually captured in a highly agitated, delirious state. At the hospital, his core body temperature reached 45 degrees Celsius, the highest ever recorded in a surviving patient with lab-confirmed stimulant overdose. He immediately had to be sedated, intubated, and aggressively cooled with ice packs and fluids as his body began to shut down. Despite the extreme heat and severe toxicity, he miraculously survived after intensive treatment. During the 2020 COVID-19 lockdown in New Hampshire, a family was forced to say goodbye to their dying father through a window as nurses in full protective gear stood inside his room. Unable to be with him in his final moments due to strict isolation rules, the nurses held up handwritten signs reading, "He is at peace and we are so sorry," showing how the pandemic separated families even at the most dire moments. In August of 1994 in Oakville, Washington, residents reported a translucent, gelatinous substance falling from the sky during multiple rainstorms over several weeks, coating cars, roads, and buildings. Many locals claim they developed flu-like symptoms afterward, and samples of the material were sent for laboratory testing, though results were inconsistent and never confirmed a clear origin. Various explanations were proposed, including atmospheric phenomena and waste from passing aircraft, but none were definitively proven, and the incident remains unexplained. In 2004, the British reality show There's Something About Miriam flew 6 men to Ibiza to compete for £10,000 in the affection of 21-year-old Mexican model Miriam Rivera. Throughout filming, the contestants were never told that Miriam was transgender. In the finale, after one man was chosen as the winner, Miriam revealed the truth on camera. The reaction was immediate. Several contestants later sued the production company, claiming emotional distress and deception. The case was ultimately settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, reportedly around £500,000 split among the contestants. Years later, in 2019, Miriam Rivera was found dead inside an apartment in Mexico at age 38. The death was officially ruled a suicide, though some of Miriam's family disputed the conclusion and believed there may have been other much darker circumstances surrounding it. This was the moment a random passenger was suddenly shoved toward an oncoming train at Northgate Station in Seattle, Washington. The attack was completely unprovoked, with the victim pushed dangerously close to the edge as the train approached, but he somehow managed to stay on the platform and survive. Police later identified the suspect as Alexander J., who was arrested and charged, with court records citing prior incidents and ongoing mental health concerns. Here's a clip of a cassowary chasing down a vehicle in what looks like something straight out of Jurassic Park. Native to parts of Australia and New Guinea, cassowaries can sprint up to 30 miles per hour and are considered one of the most dangerous birds on Earth. With dagger-like claws on each foot and a reputation for aggressive charges, they've been known to seriously injure or even kill humans, making them one of the closest real-life reminders of what dinosaurs may have been like. Here's a video of a 500-pound man being rescued from a 15-foot hole at a construction site in California. Officials said the man wasn't a construction worker and somehow ended up trapped at the bottom, prompting a large emergency response to lift him out. Crews had to carefully extract him due to his size and the depth of the hole, and he was taken to a hospital afterward, though how he got there remains unclear. In honor of April Fool's Day, these are some of the biggest scams of all time. Elizabeth Holmes founded the company Theranos in 2003, claiming her device could run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood. At its peak, the company was valued at $9 billion, but it was all a lie. The technology never worked, test results endangered patients, and Holmes was convicted of fraud in one of the biggest corporate scandals of all time. In 2023, she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In 2016 in China, a rideshare scam emerged where drivers deliberately used unsettling profile photos and eerie-looking identities to make passengers uneasy before pickup, hoping they'd cancel the ride. The moment a rider backed out, the driver could collect a cancellation fee without ever showing up, turning their fear into a source of profit. In 2001, a Hooters waitress named Jody Berry won a company contest promising a new Toyota, but when she was blindfolded to receive her prize, her manager handed her a Toyota doll instead. Barry sued for fraud and won, walking away with a real Toyota instead of the Jedi Master. In the 1990s in Nigeria, conman Emmanuel Nuud scammed a Brazilian bank out of $242 million by selling them a completely fake airport project. Posing as a top official, he used forged documents and fake calls to convince executives the deal was real. The fraud ran for years before finally being exposed, and while Nuud was sentenced to prison, much of the money was never recovered. In the 1990s in California, con artist Steve Comazar sold a solar-powered clothes dryer for $49.95 through magazine ads. Customers who ordered it received nothing more than a basic clothesline, realizing too late the product was technically truthful but deliberately misleading. In 2021 in Ohio, a supposed high school football team called Bishop's Sycamore played on ESPN against a top program and was blown out 58-0, raising immediate questions about who the hell they were. It was later revealed the school barely existed, many players were adults, and some even had criminal records. The program itself didn't even have a real campus. After the exposure, the head coach faced legal issues, the program completely collapsed, and the scandal sparked national outrage over how it was possible for this to even happen. In 2001 in the UK, Charles Ingram shocked viewers by winning £1 million on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire despite struggling early on in the game. As the stakes rose, he suddenly began answering difficult questions with confidence, choosing answers that stunned both the audience and the host. Days later, producers reviewed the tapes and discovered his wife and an accomplice had been coughing to signal the correct answers. The prize was revoked, and all three were convicted of fraud. Morbid Facts, Part 942. Simon Cowell once admitted he went so far with Botox and facial fillers that he no longer recognized his own face in photos. After years of cosmetic treatments gradually altered his features into something noticeably unnatural. Experts have suggested the buildup of filler can distort facial structure and even affect how fluid drains from the face, leaving a permanently swollen, tightened look that's essentially impossible to undo. The moment it hit him was when even his own son reacted to how different he looked, forcing him to confront just how far his appearance had drifted from what it once was. In 1912, French brothers Michael and Edmond Navratil, just 4 and 2 years old, were secretly abducted from their mother by their father and brought aboard the Titanic under fake names. When the ship began to sink, their father woke them up, brought them to the final lifeboat, and placed them inside knowing he himself wouldn't survive. The boys made it to New York alone, unable to speak English and with no one knowing who they were, earning them the nickname the Titanic Orphans. Their identities remained a mystery until their mother recognized their photos in a newspaper and traveled across the ocean to reclaim them. In August of 2023 in Maceió, Brazil, 27-year-old Fernanda Silva Veloz de Cruz Pinto accepted a piece of chocolate from an elderly fortune teller who had just warned her she only had a few days left to live. Trusting it because it was sealed and fearing for her life, she ate it, then within hours began vomiting, losing vision, and texting family members about a bitter taste and racing heart. She was rushed to the hospital but died in agonizing pain the next day. Toxicology later found high levels of pesticides in her body, and police investigated whether the chocolate had been deliberately poisoned, but the case remains unresolved. In 1987 in Cameron Highlands, Malaysia, Sultan Iskandar of Johor, who later became King of Malaysia, was accused of beating a golf caddy to death after the man allegedly laughed at a bad shot. At the time, Malaysian rulers had legal immunity, so no charges were brought despite public outrage. The incident became one of several controversies that led to the country stripping its royalty of immunity in 1993, allowing future rulers to be prosecuted like ordinary citizens. Seattle artist Sunday Nobody spent $25,000 creating a bronze statue combining the ancient Greek Discobolus with the face of handsome Squidward. He consulted archaeologists to ensure it could withstand long-term underwater conditions, then deliberately sank it about 9 meters deep in the Mediterranean Sea so it could potentially be discovered in the future as a convincing artifact. This executioner's sword from the late 17th century Germany was engraved with the words, "When I raise this sword, so I wish that this poor sinner will receive eternal life." The Creel Mound in what is now West Virginia, built around 250 BC by the Adena culture, contained a central burial surrounded by multiple skeletons arranged in a circle, with their feet pointed toward the body in the middle. Archaeologists believe the positioning suggests a ritual burial, possibly involving individuals placed around a high-status figure, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. The Celtic Carnix was an ancient war horn used by Celtic tribes between 300 BC and 200 AD. It was a long, vertical bronze instrument, often shaped with an animal head at the top, designed to project intimidating sounds across the battlefield. Moments before combat, its eerie, haunting blasts would echo through the air, one of the last sounds Roman soldiers heard before facing their enemies. Manute Bol, one of the tallest players in NBA history at 7'7", lived through extreme hardship long before playing basketball. He reportedly witnessed villages in Sudan being attacked during the Second Sudanese Civil War and claimed he once killed a lion with a spear as a teenager. After making it to the NBA, Bol earned millions, but gave away most of his money to support refugees and humanitarian efforts in Sudan, often leaving himself nearly broke. In 2010, he suddenly became ill after returning from Africa. Doctors diagnosed him with acute kidney failure and Stevens-Johnson syndrome, a rare and life-threatening condition that causes the skin to blister and peel away. He died at just 47 years old, with much of his body covered in painful lesions from the disease. In the United States, lumber baron Wellington R. Burt died in 1919 with an estate worth around $100 million, but none of it went to his children or grandchildren. His will included a spite clause ordering the fortune be withheld until 21 years after the death of his last surviving grandchild who was alive at the time of his death. Because of that condition, all of his children and every one of those grandchildren died before the money was ever released. The estate wasn't settled until 2011, nearly a century later, leaving the fortune to distant descendants who had never even known him. During a live Argentine league match between Estudiantes and Vélez Sarsfield, a green laser was repeatedly pointed at the goalkeeper while play was ongoing, briefly disrupting him during key moments. But broadcast cameras tracked the source in the stands and sniped the fan in real time, still holding the laser pointer before she realized she was on the big screen. She was later identified as Delfina Quiroga, a die-hard Estudiantes fan from La Plata. Argentine media reported that her father is a local prosecutor, and despite the visibility of the incident, she was not criminally charged. However, authorities in the club are expected to issue a stadium ban that could last up to 2 years, since using laser pointers during matches is considered a safety violation and interference with play. In 1980 in Florida, 19-year-old Mark DeFries was arrested for taking his deceased father's tools from a school workshop. He was initially sentenced to 4 years, but spent over 30 years in prison after repeatedly escaping. An autistic savant, DeFries became known for building tools from basic scraps, picking locks, and even climbing razor wire fences. Each escape added more time, while prison officials punished him with extreme isolation, totaling an estimated 10,000 plus hours in solitary confinement. Despite being nonviolent, his sentence kept growing until he was finally released on parole in 2019. Sorry in advance for this one. What the hell's wrong with people, man? In July of 2023, a 31-year-old man identified in reports as Mr. Liu was admitted to a hospital in China after experiencing severe abdominal pain, sweating, and signs of infection. You probably know where this is going. Doctors discovered he had inserted a live eel into his anus, which then forced its way through his rectum and colon. The eel used its sharp teeth to bite through his intestinal wall, causing a perforation that allowed bacteria and fecal matter to leak into his abdominal cavity, triggering life-threatening peritonitis. CT scans showed the eel moving inside his abdomen before surgeons performed emergency surgery. During the operation, they found the eel had punctured through the colon and entered the abdominal cavity. The eel was removed and the damaged sections of intestine were repaired, while surgeons cleaned out contamination to prevent further infection. He survived after intensive treatment, but doctors noted that without rapid surgical intervention, the injuries would have quickly led to organ failure and an extremely painful death. Between 2014 and 2015, Ohio woman Brittany Pilkington was responsible for the deaths of 3 of her children, all infant sons, over a 13-month span. The first child's death was initially ruled a case of SIDS, but suspicions grew after a second infant died under similar circumstances. Doctors briefly considered a possible genetic condition, and despite investigations, the youngest boy was returned home only to also die a few days later. One of her children, the only daughter, was never harmed. In police questioning, Brittany confessed to deliberately smothering all 3. She described restraining the older one by holding his legs during the struggle until he went limp after a few minutes. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a long history of trauma surrounding the family. Brittany was repeatedly beaten by her biological father as a child, and even worse, her husband was her former stepfather, whom she said had groomed and sexually abused her starting at the age of 9 before she eventually married him as a teenager. In 2018, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 1993, Sicilian mafia boss Giovanni Brusca ordered the kidnapping of 12-year-old Giuseppe Di Matteo to silence his father, a former mob insider who had begun cooperating with authorities. Disguised as police, captors lured the boy away, promising to reunite him with his dad. He was held for 779 days in degrading conditions, often caged, beaten, underfed, and moved between hideouts, while photos of his suffering were sent to pressure his father into silence. When testimony continued, Brusca ordered the kill, dismissing the boy as the puppy. Giuseppe was strangled and his body dissolved in acid to erase all evidence. The murder shocked Italy because it shattered the long-promoted myth that the mafia followed a code of honor that spared all children. But investigators in later trials revealed that this was never truly a rule, and Giuseppe's death became one of the most disturbing symbols of the mafia's retaliation tactics during the 1990s crackdowns. In 2019, police uncovered an abuse case at the Danby House nursing home in North Carolina after staff were caught recording and encouraging violent confrontations between elderly residents with dementia. Investigators said workers laughed, filmed, and allegedly urged a 73-year-old man to attack a 70-year-old woman, shouting instructions like punch her in the face while she cried for help. Both residents required constant care and couldn't fully understand what was happening, turning a supervised environment into exploitation for entertainment. The footage led to criminal charges and renewed scrutiny over how vulnerable patients in long-term care facilities can be manipulated by caregivers. Eminem was stalked by the same man who broke into his properties 3 times over 6 years, repeatedly reaching him despite arrests and court orders. In 2019, the stalker broke into one of Eminem's former homes and told the new homeowner he was looking for his brother Marshall. In 2020, he escalated by entering Eminem's actual residence through an unlocked entry point while Eminem was asleep, later telling police he was there to kill him. After being arrested and convicted, the man returned again in 2024, once more breaching Eminem's property. Court records show the break-in weren't the result of sophisticated planning, but repeated exploitation of access points and timing, highlighting how even high-level security measures can fail against persistent obsession. Eminem was unharmed, but prosecutors described the pattern as escalating and dangerous. A mummified carrier pigeon found inside a UK chimney in 1982 was carrying an encrypted World War II message from 1944 that's never been decoded. The pigeon likely died mid-mission during Britain's wartime communications and remained sealed in the chimney for nearly 40 years. Attached to its leg was a capsule holding a coded strip of letters and numbers believed to be connected to D-Day operations. Despite repeated attempts by historians and codebreakers, the message's meaning and destination remain unknown. Britain's intelligence agency GCHQ has confirmed the cipher is still unsolved and publicly asked for help deciphering it, leaving whatever information the pigeon was carrying permanently undelivered. In 2022, DMV rapper Markel Moro, aka Gunu, was shot and killed in Washington, D.C. Days later, his family held a memorial inside a D.C. nightclub where his embalmed body was dressed in designer clothes, propped upright on stage, and displayed while his music played to a crowd. The invite-only event was attended by family, friends, and fans, turning a nightclub into a viewing space and leaving people standing feet away from his real corpse. There's no evidence Gunu ever requested this, making it one of the strangest memorials ever held for a deceased rapper. A baby named Breland was born completely healthy, but just 2 days after birth, she was kissed on the mouth by someone with an active cold sore. Because her immune system was not yet developed, she contracted herpes simplex virus, which spread to her brain and caused HSV encephalitis. The infection led to seizures and permanent brain damage, another case demonstrating why you should be very careful when kissing a baby. In 1925, Ora Ralph Thomas, an Illinois sheriff's deputy during the Prohibition era, was assassinated by members of the KKK. Thomas was the leader of an armed anti-Klan paramilitary group, making him a direct target. When 3 Klansmen ambushed him, Thomas returned fire, shooting and killing all 3 of his attackers before succumbing to his own wounds. Daisy Coleman grew up in a family marked by repeated tragedy. In 2009, her father was killed when their car slipped on black ice and plunged into a ravine in Missouri. In 2012, at age 14, Daisy was sexually assaulted while incapacitated and left outside her home in freezing temperatures. Despite hospital records documenting injuries and extreme intoxication, the charges were later dropped, and she was publicly discredited, triggering years of vicious harassment. In 2013, the family's home burned down under mysterious circumstances, and in 2018, Daisy's younger brother Tristan died in a car crash, mirroring their father's death. By 2020, Daisy was struggling with severe PTSD, harassment, a reported stalker, and learning she couldn't have children, a condition doctors said may have been linked to the assault. Under the weight of it all, she took her own life that August at the young age of 23. 4 months later, her mother Melinda also died by suicide. Daisy's story was documented in Audrey and Daisy, released while she was still trying to rebuild her life. Vern Troyer lived with a rare genetic condition called cartilage hair hypoplasia, which left him just 2 feet 8 inches tall and caused lifelong medical complications. Despite worldwide fame as Mini-Me, he struggled for years with severe depression and alcohol dependency, leading to repeated hospitalizations and psychiatric interventions. In April of 2018, Troyer was hospitalized following a serious health crisis related to alcohol and died shortly after at the age of 48. Authorities later confirmed his passing was intentional, highlighting the long-term toll of his mental health struggles behind the scenes of his public success. In 2022, a 19-year-old woman in Brazil gave birth to twins who were later confirmed by DNA testing to have different fathers. The rare biological phenomenon behind this is called heteropaternal superfecundation, which occurs when 2 eggs released during the same ovulation cycle are fertilized by sperm from different men within a short window of time. Although the twins develop together in the womb and are born at the same time, they're genetically half-siblings. Fewer than a few dozen confirmed cases have been documented worldwide, making it one of the rarest known anomalies in human reproduction. Brian Egg vanished in August of 2018 after suddenly disappearing from his San Francisco home. Weeks later, police went to the house for a welfare check and discovered a hidden room concealed behind a fake wall. Inside was a single large fish tank containing Brian's body, decapitated and missing both hands. Investigators later determined he'd been murdered by his roommate after an argument over rent and drug money while the two were using cocaine. After killing him, the roommate cut off Brian's head and hands, hid the body in the aquarium, filled it with water to slow down the decomposition, and sealed the room behind a fake wall. The killer, named Jeffrey Francisco, then fled the state but was eventually tracked down and arrested. Although he was originally charged with murder and facing several decades in prison, Francisco was allowed to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, which made him eligible for early parole. In 2021, after only serving about 7 years of a 15-year sentence, the killer was released, a decision that sparked outrage when the public learned he was free. Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman from Slaughter, Louisiana, who was found dead in January of 2022 after years of being left to rot on a couch in her parents' home. She suffered from severe autism and was reportedly nonverbal. When authorities arrived, Lacey's body was fused to the sofa, surrounded by years of human waste, insects, and mold. She only weighed about 96 pounds, had bed sores that exposed bone, and was covered in feces and maggots. Coroners ruled her death a homicide caused by severe neglect, starvation, and untreated medical conditions. Investigators determined she had likely been left in the same position for at least 12 years, slowly melting into the sofa while her parents lived in the house with her. Despite the horrific condition of her body and the prolonged suffering, her parents were initially charged with second-degree murder, but the charges were later reduced and ultimately dismissed by a judge in 2024, since the judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't prove that Lacey's parents intended to kill her or knowingly caused her death, triggering widespread public outrage over how such prolonged extreme neglect could result in no prison sentence.